back to the show, Business Mastery for Startups, Scale-Ups, and Early Stage Businesses with your host, Jerry Gadori. That's me. And this week, we've got Jason Corder. Jason is both a business person, I'm embarrassed to admit, a former glam rock star. Not glam, I'm sorry, shoegazing. I'm sure he'll insult me back later. But most importantly, he's a noted speaker. So I'm excited to talk about that with him today. Jason, could you do a better job introducing yourself than I did, despite your music taste?
Yeah, I heard that glam rock, and I was thinking, what would Kurt say? I always go by the the kind of ethos of WWKS. What would Kurt say? So I'm not sure if he would have said that he was glam either, but
definitely not.
Definitely not. No, absolutely no. But I appreciate that. Absolutely, it's great to be with you here. I've really loved your work and your show. So it's an honor to be here. Yeah, I'm sure I'll blabber on about myself endlessly already. So no need to start right now.
No worries. I think I don't know where I got glam from grunge. That was quite
right.
But the interesting thing. So for those of you who don't know, which would likely be most of you, I spoke to Jason a few times, and then we had the idea of him being on the show. Jason is a public speaker, and the reason why I was talking to him was I do a lot of public speaking, and I was thinking about getting into it more again because it's had a big impact on my career. And I thought, who better to speak about what impact public speaking can have on your career, on your business, than someone who does it for a living. So Jason, let's start off there. First of all, how did you get into speaking?
Yeah.
And let's just take it from that.
Absolutely. So my background really was as an artist, and as these days it's called a creative. I was a visual artist for 20 years, also sometimes professor. And then I was in the film business for 10 years, which I, by the way, don't recommend to anybody who enjoys their sanity. And it was at the end of that, so that's what, 30 years, God, I'm old now. It was at the end of that decade in the film business after, the second time that I had work stolen from me and the normal stories you hear in Hollywood, that I really kind of decided that I really wanted to pivot to something that, I spent most of my life living outside the country in Africa and Europe. So I have a lot of stories to tell. I feel like I have a lot of kind of global perspective, if you will, to give. And I immediately realized that the public speaking space is a space in which I could tell those stories. And I could bring that, I don't know if I'll use the word wisdom, but some amount of wisdom to that space because I've had such a wild life and seen, so much of the world. And it occurred to me that public speaking was a space that I could do that more easily. In film, you have to find 30 other people to work with, and you need $5 million, et cetera. In visual art, it was very fulfilling, and I had a lot of very fulfilling exhibitions and experiences, but you're not using the literal word. You're not expressing something kind of tangible to people in visual art. You're showing them some beautiful painting, but there's no way to express ideas. And so I think I realized that the power of ideas themselves is something that's important to me. And so I immediately pivoted into the public speaking space and did a training to get a TEDx talk and et cetera, and took it from there. So that was really the inspiration around it. And I will say I'm really enjoying being able to actually speak literally and give tangible tools to people instead of a 6-foot abstract painting that makes them go, wait, I think I see a dog in there somewhere. So.
No, that's awesome. And I'll tell you, as a speaker, you have the opportunity to touch so many people. And today, where everything is recorded, it creates an incredible digital asset, especially when you can slap a brand like TEDx on it.
Absolutely. And there's, the TEDx is getting diluted to some extent because there's so many more licenses giving out for them around the world. But there's something that those red letters on the stage and that red dot, there's something really iconic. They did a great job when they obviously decided to do that. I mean, TED and TEDx. So it's an iconic space that kind of says to people, oh, this guy knows what he's doing. I may not actually know what I'm doing, but at least it gives that impression to people.
Well, what I think is great about it is it sets a bar. You know, you might not enjoy a TED Talk, you might not enjoy the topic of a TED Talk, but there's an expectation of quality there that I think really helps with your authority and your trust as a business owner. Let me ask you this, Jason. For a business owner maybe hasn't done speaking, or in your example, you're a musician, you're involved in television and movies, so you were already used to being on stage. For a business owner who lacks that, is there any advice that you could give them?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, no, that's an excellent question. Um, I will say this, the process, like for example, of a TEDx, but in any talk really, the process of going through that from the beginning where you literally think of your idea, what's your talk going to be about, and then you write the best 1,000 words that you've ever written in your entire life. You memorize it, you fly to the venue, you walk out on that stage. That entire process is incredibly challenging. Yes, I'll be really honest with business owners who haven't done it. It is challenging, but it is maybe maybe the most fulfilling thing I've ever done so far in my career. That again, it's such a long and challenging process to start with one idea, one sentence in your head. I used to do this with film. I would have one idea or sentence in my head, and then years down the line that translates into a movie or a TV series or whatever. So it's that interesting process of taking an idea and putting it into the tangible world. But I can tell you this, the rewards from having done that are so huge. They say in public speaking that public speaking ups anyone's game. So as a business owner, it ups your game to go through that process of doing a public talk in front of a live audience that's recorded and then goes on to YouTube. Having to hone your ideas into the best 1,000 words of your life and then present it. It really ups everything that you do. That was my experience with it. So what I would say to business owners is, yes, it's challenging, but the rewards are so huge. And I think these days there's an appreciation that all of us suffer from some level of, mental health challenge or nervous in front of people. Like there's a much more of an allowance for that these days. I don't know if it's post-COVID or what. So I would say, even if you're afraid, don't be afraid. People will support you along the way, and you will find that confidence to get onto that stage. So I highly recommend it.
Yeah, bravery isn't not being scared. It's being scared and doing it anyway. But you said two things there that I'd like to kind of pull out and talk more about. So one of them is the challenge involved. I think that journey is important. I think without that, the bar drops, and now the quality that makes a TEDx talk special is gone. So I think that's great. But I was thinking, maybe some lower stakes ways for folks to get started might be speaking at a local Rotary Club, speaking at an association you belong to. And I don't know if they're still involved, or still in existence rather. But one of the things that I used to enjoy quite a lot was Toastmasters.
Yeah, 100%. Totally still going and thriving. And you're absolutely right. There are a lot. It doesn't have to be that the first talk that you do is a TEDx. That's what I did. But, the artist likes to jump right. Where's the fire? Oh, fire. Oh, let me jump into it. So, but you don't have to do it that way. And you're exactly right. Lions Club, Kiwanis Club. These are clubs that have been around for over, since the beginning of the last century. Very sort of old school spaces. I think a lot of Americans don't even necessarily know about, but they're still going on. And Toastmasters is another one, as you say. So you're right. And that's a great way to do it. I mean, you can also, even before you get on those stages, you can also even just practice doing some virtual talks, maybe within your own company or within a circle of friends, even just to practice. Now, that is great practice, and it does do parts of that process, but there's something special about the live in-person talk. And that's, a lot of my work is about that live experience between people being unobtainable over a computer screen. But you're right. There are a lot of chances, a lot of spaces to do. Those are of course free talks, by the way, for people there. Obviously the Lions Club or Toastmasters, they're not paying you, but they are providing you the venue, et cetera. And there's usually someone filming it. If not, you can bring your own camera person to make sure that you're getting your first talk on camera. So that's a very good point. There are a lot of ways to get on stage.
Yeah, and I think, Jason, so this show lives on YouTube as well as other, audio platforms, as do other YouTube videos that I make. And YouTube has the potential to become an earner. But for me, it's a dissemination platform for my ideas and an opportunity to find a like-minded group that would get value from what I have to say. I personally, and I know this isn't a universal view, it's just mine, but I view speaking the same way. So when I go to a conference, I'm going to conferences that are relevant to an audience that I care about, that I'm passionate about to speak. Sometimes they just pay my way. Sometimes they pay me, a small amount, or sometimes a not so small amount. But for me, the main thing is to get in front of folks. And I think for business people, that's a healthy attitude to have. Again, just like YouTube, it's improbable that my channel will ever get big enough to make significant money, but it needs to only be a fraction of that to have a big impact on my business. And I think talking can be the same thing.
100%. And this is we're slightly veering into this space of advice for business owners and the number one thing you can do, but you said it yourself there. And this is one of the things I learned when I got into the public speaking space, and I realized how much pleasure I was deriving from just exploring ideas and getting to express ideas that I'd had my whole life, but I'd never put down in written word because, again, I was in this artist space. But that is that, the money will follow the value.
Yes.
And I love that, as you say, and that's what I've been focusing on as well with these talks, or if I want to create a video, like you say, not focusing on how much money am I going to make here from this? No, how much value am I going to give to the world, to people? And the more value you give, the more that the money follows that.
100%. I couldn't agree more. You also mentioned something else I think is super relevant. So during COVID, quite obviously live speaking dried up like everything else did. So when I would do talks, they would either be live via Zoom, or even more often they would be pre-recorded. And then the facility whoever's hosting it, like for example, I did, I can't remember the name of the company, but I did a talent engagement and attraction session for cybersecurity folks. And they had us pre-record everything, but they still had us go live to the room so we could answer questions as they came up. And strangely enough for me, I found recording a session more difficult than doing it live, because live I could get feedback from the audience, even if it wasn't Q&A, but I could see, are my words impacting? Is there engagement? Are they leaning in? Are they looking at their phones? Yeah. Whereas when I was talking to a camera for 45 minutes, oh my gosh, that was so difficult for me.
100%. And again, you're kind of veering into really a lot of what my work is about in general. My TEDx talk was about what I call social closeness, which again is the opposite of social distancing. And you're getting into a space where there's a word that's trying to come into my brain. I'm trying to keep it out. And that word is energy, because that's a word that, the West doesn't really appreciate as being real. And the East is like, oh yeah, of course we know that there's energy flowing through everything. Of course, everybody knows that. But what I'm referring to here is that when you're in that live space, yes, you're visually seeing someone reacting, putting their phone down, laughing at what you're saying, but you're also feeling them, right? You're feeling the energy of the room. And when I did my TEDx talk, I don't know how this happened. I was sort of lucky enough to get almost like a message from God or from the universe. I walked onto the stage, and instead of launching into my talk immediately, which is what most people do, I stood there and I smiled and looked around the audience. And you can see it. I thought they would cut it out of the video. They didn't. So you see me standing there. Everyone's probably thinking, is this guy forgotten his speech? But I was actually really, as I say now, I was settling into the energy of the room. So there's actually this palpable physical feeling that you get from being with other human beings in a physical space. And you're picking up on that in your talks, and I'm picking up on that in mine. And again, as you say, when it's virtual, that's not there. And that's, again, a lot of my work in general is about that very fact itself, that, screens are wonderful as tools, and these devices we have, they're wonderful as tools. This video is possible because of these tools, but the sustenance that we need for our mental and physical health, in my opinion, comes from those in-person interactions, because there's something else there. We can call it energy or just feelings, love, a connection to God, or however we want to describe it. But it's palpable, and it's beautiful. It's what it is, really beautiful.
It's interesting. Rock stars describe a little bit about what you're talking about as leaving it all on the stage. And I certainly have never done anything like that. But I will say I've done a fair amount of talks. And one of them, I did an 8-hour workshop, just me, in front of about 70 folks. And it was the Massachusetts Staffing Association. It was teaching both companies and agencies how to transition a recruiter into a technical recruiting role. So A to Z, super long. By the end of that day, I swear to you, I felt like I'd run a marathon.
Yeah, 100%.
I poured myself into my car when it was over. I was exhausted. It was crazy.
And I can imagine that. I mean, that sounds totally exhausting, but I bet at the same time, and maybe it's something you took with you out of there, you were also getting, I'm sure you were also sort of getting a lot of energy, right? From that 8 hours, that's a long time of getting it, but I'm sure you came away with a lot that you sort of received in terms of energy as well.
Absolutely. And I'll tell you, shifting back to a career perspective, I did that gratis. It was a favor to the Massachusetts Staffing Association, but I got so much follow-on business from that.
Yeah.
And that's the thing. This is a business podcast. I know I keep coming back to it, but that's the thing. I really hope that small business people and founders understand. The more that you can get out there, there's a number of things that follow. The most obvious being potentially there's someone in your audience who might be a customer. That's direct and obvious, and that's great. But you're also getting the opportunity to further hone your message so you can articulate super clearly what it is that you're trying to articulate. I tend to be something of a chatty Cathy. So for me, it's a great exercise in parsing things down, culling, and making my talk more streamlined.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. 100%. That was one of the things that struck me the most about the process when I went through of doing my TEDx talk, was tightening and tightening and cutting out. And that's exactly what you said. I'm just like you, very chatty Cathy. And my alias on Instagram is Blabbermouth, which I like it. I'm going to keep it and go more with that. But I noticed before my talk, I literally cut about a third. I think it was maybe 1,200, 1,300 words for what was eventually a 9-minute talk. I cut it down to just under 1,000. That's a beautiful process of, as they say, the less you say, the more impact those words have, right? And so one of the things I like to tell speakers who are kind of getting into this space as well is some of the most important moments in any talk are the silences between the words.
Yes. That's when it all hits.
Exactly. The worst thing that you can see when you see a talk, a TEDx talk or any other, is a person who starts speaking and there's really no variation for the next 10 minutes. And there's no silences really. And you can tell that that's born out. And I'm not, by the way, criticizing people. Like all of us go through this on stage. But I think that's born out of a certain fear of let me get through this. Let me get it over with, And one of the things I realized is not only is tighten, cut out, more silences, but it's also to let your talk breathe. Let there be those moments of silences. As you say, that's when people absorb it. If there's no breaks, there's no moment to absorb what they've just heard. So I love that. Absolutely. And as you say, it helps you just get better and better every time you get out there and you speak. And it's, to connect with 100 people or 500 or whatever, even if you're not getting paid, is a very enriching, fulfilling experience for us. We're getting a lot from that audience, even if we're not getting something financially. So 100% agree with you. As much as even for full-time public speakers who rely on that money for their living, doing some free talks is also very, very beneficial to the audience, but to yourself as well.
Yeah, mileage may vary, but I can say that every single conference I spoke at, I gained clients from, literally 100%. It's such a powerful tool. It's such a different conversation to engage with someone via a stage, have them come up to you after the talk and continue talking than it is for you to call that person and offer your services. It's such a night and day difference. But you said something I want to dig a little bit deeper into. So when I wrote my book, my first draft was around 240, 250 pages. When I talked to my book coach, he was like, nonfiction business books need to be short. People don't have the attention span they did. And we beat that 240, 250 pages down to 179. And I'll tell you, it hurt. I was like, I left so much on the table. But when it was all done and the reviews I've gotten, I think we're at like 48 now and counting. It's been the same. It's been, this is a tight book. There's no wasted material. It's it's an easy to read guide. And it's the same with the talk. If you are too verbose, too wordy, you just lose your audience. But if you give them that bare frame with space to absorb it, they're like sponges.
Yeah. Yeah, 100%. It makes me think of a couple of things. One is, in this new age of AI, that kind of overly verbose, kind of flowery writing that AI always seems to want to do. I don't know.
Yes.
I think the guy that programmed AI must have been from San Francisco or something, because why else would they be just going flower all the time?
Well, Victorian authors got paid by the word, Jason. That's why Victorian novels were so wordy. I think AI knows that there's a data charge somewhere, and it's a revenue stream they're creating.
So I can imagine that a book that is tight, especially in this day and age, is going to be so appealing, especially for business owners who, as you say, don't have a lot of time compared to other people. And it's good to remember that's not going to be your only interaction with someone, right? They bought your book. That's great, but you don't have to tell your entire life's wisdom in there thinking, oh, I'll never talk to them again, right? The idea is they're going to read it and then they're going to reach out to you, and then you can give them more value and bring in. And again, as I don't know, my dad had two sayings that are actually contradictory, but I was going to say one of them, of course, is less is more. Mm-hmm. He also had a saying that was some is good, more is better, and too much is just right. So I'm not sure which one he always followed, but less is more. It really, really is. When we're on stage there, we want to give our all. We want to tell so much. But again, people can't take it all in. They just can't. I have this problem. I've always had this problem as a artist and just as a chatty Cathy. Is my heart, I want to pour my heart out in everything I do every second. And the problem is that's not necessarily what the audience needs and wants right now. Yes. They might do a lot better at getting a shorter, tighter message, even though you want to pour your heart out. Think about your audience, I guess is what I would say. They need something a little more concise, and it's more absorbable as well.
100%. And, I'm always someone that wants to over deliver. So I, like you, I open my mouth and I just pour everything I know about that topic out. And you can almost see the poor person going 3, 2, 1, and then just drowning under the amount that I've given them. It took me a lot, and frankly, I still struggle with it, to be able to pull back enough so they get what they need, not what I want to give them. And I think that's the lesson. And speaking of writing and speaking, I think you see it here too, in music and in art, in writing fiction. Sometimes the creator creates what they want and what they think their audience wants, and not what their audience wants. And that's something I still struggle with from time to time.
Yeah, absolutely. That I've got chills now. And you're right. I think especially for artists, in the artist space, of course, I mean, that's what we're here for. Let them pour out what they want, and don't think about, oh, will the audience like this song? No, write the song you hear. But we're not in that space here, what you hear right now. We're in a space of words. We're in a space of nonfiction, if you will, and actually giving tangible value. And so it really should be about the audience. It's not about, me and my journey or whatever. That's great. But I like that. I think you're 100% right. I guess that's why I've never been a big fan of Queen, the band, but I'm really diverging here now.
Yes, let's pull it back. This is what happens. We're like grunge rockers on the show.
I know. Sorry about that.
Let me flip everything you said to a business context,
Okay.
because you're right. I completely agree. But here's the thing I think about: if I'm going to speak at, a couple of weeks ago or a couple months ago, oh my gosh, I was at Boston Startup Week back in September. So 4 or 5 months ago. So at Startup Boston Week, there were a couple different types of folks there. There were startup curious people that were thinking about starting a startup. There were founders there with active startups. There were VC folks, and there were people who provided services to that crowd. So people flew in from all over the country to go to this conference. I talked about my book, Destination Employer. I recorded some episodes of this show there live with folks. So I was there for a reason. If somebody walks into my talk, they know ahead of time because it's listed what it is. It's my job to deliver what I told them I was going to. And if I'm there to talk about, again, this was my book, so probably not the best example, but if I'm there to talk about Destination Employer from the perspective of what's in it for them, they don't care about me. I'm just a delivery system. So again, you've got to stay laser focused on what we know them to be coming for. So when I used to speak at conferences, one of my more popular talks was how to know when and how to hire your first salesperson. So if you're a startup founder and you're looking to bring in your first salesperson, when are you ready? What types of systems and processes do you need to have in place? How do you go about that? What do you look for? That kind of stuff. That was one of the more popular talks that I did. So when I did that talk, a bunch of irrelevant stories about me serve nobody. It just takes time away from the hour or 2 hours or whatever it is.
Right. And I think, it's great to have a hook, as we call it, to start the talk.
Yes.
That's great. And that takes 5 seconds. It's an icebreaker, right? It's to get everyone to suddenly get off their phones. Oh, this guy's funny. Oh, laugh for a second and kind of all settle in now to the talk together. So that's fine. But I 100% agree with you. And just to get also back to what we were talking about silences and just the way you deliver that talk. And this is great for, as you say, for business owners who are thinking about getting into this space, or that silence, it shows a confident, someone who's willing to stand on stage and say a funny line or say an impactful line and then shut up for a second and look and smile at the audience as you see them absorb it. That takes an incredible level of confidence. It's funny. You'd think it would be the opposite. Oh no, it takes confidence to say your memorized talk. No, it takes confidence to shut up after you just said something really impactful. And that if you wait 2 or 3 seconds, you're going to increase the value of that from that silence. And just looking up at stage and someone who's smiling back at you but not speaking, that level of confidence is palpable, and it's something to keep in mind for people who are speakers.
And it brings the attention to you. So I will never forget this. I was at a conference, and it wasn't huge. I would say maybe 200 people at the talk in that zone, 150, 200 people. It was a big open hall with separate tables. And the speaker was up there speaking. One of the tables to the front-ish, like in the front third, was being kind of loud as this person was trying to speak. And so finally, he just stopped talking and stood and looked at the table. And they didn't even notice because they weren't paying attention at all. It took a solid 10 or 15 seconds, which felt like approximately 30 years for the rest of the room. But the room got quiet. He wasn't talking. Finally, they looked up, and they all looked at him, and they got really quiet. And as soon as they got quiet, he turned back and resumed his talk. That table did not peep once more through the whole thing. They were like, it was pretty great. But the energy, not only did he shut up the bothersome table, but more importantly, everyone was laser focused on him. And the strength it took to do that, he added multiple orders of magnitude of authority to his talk.
Yes. And it's the opposite, again, of what we would think, how does being silent help a public speaker? But that's one of those little kind of secret hacks or super hacks that you learn along the way that is the opposite of what we might think.
So if we're to lay out a path, we've talked a lot about, what a speaker gets from it, trust, authority. if we lay out a path, what would that look like? So Jason, someone from a small business comes to says, I'm thinking of doing a talk of getting involved in this so that I can better, draw attention to my company. What advice would you give them if you were to lay out a list of steps?
So a list of steps for then getting how they could get into that space.
It's a high level to give them some idea.
Yeah. I think that as you said before, is definitely the starting point. Is practice it by doing some free local talks at some of these old clubs that bring in speakers every week, from Lions Club to Toastmasters to Kiwanis to the Rotary Club. That's a great way to practice and kind of start. Now, I should back up one bit here. The first thing that you really have to do in that space is think about, what do I want to talk about? Try to pick the very first thing to do is create your title. This is the fun part, because every one of us that was, sat around when we were teenagers thinking of band names, right? We always think of the band name before we actually even write the first song, right? That's the first thing the band does when they get together, is they work on the band name. Same is true for me, is true with talk. So think of that title, because that title will be like your kind of help you sort of light your way on that journey. So that's the first thing to focus on, is what is the biggest piece of value that I can bring to my community right now, and how can I describe it in a talk title? That would be the starting point. Once you have that, then you can start to actually write your talk as you start reaching out to Rotary Club, Kiwanis Club, etc. Once you've done a couple of those local talks and you've gotten it videoed, I think the question is then, if you want to keep going further, I would recommend applying for a TEDx talk, because I applied for 100 TEDx talks in the span of 3 weeks in order to get 4 yeses, by the way. So it's not easy. I'm not saying it's easy to get a TEDx, but it is doable. The links are there. You can find them. You can submit. It's something that anyone can apply to do. And you don't need any prior speaking background, by the way, to get a TEDx talk. Mm-hmm. You just have to have a really good idea. So I think because it is doable, I would say that would be your next step. And then the next step is obviously applying to paid speaking gigs and finding those leads and reaching out. And that's a hustle like any other hustle. And I think the one question I would say, or I would pose to people, is, do you think you might need a coach to do this, or a speaking program to do this? It's not easy if you really want to get on paid stages, it's not easy, I would say, to do that on your own. And so I think that would be the one other piece of advice I would say, is maybe think about getting a one-on-one coach if you want to really take it further, or enter a speaking program as well.
This might be biased because I do a lot of coaching, but I can't recommend coaching enough. Heck, if it's good enough for every single professional sport in the world, it's good enough for us. And I'll tell you, my book would not be what it was. I never would have written a bestseller if not for the help of my book coach, Vincent Lancy. And I can totally see where coaching is the same. So you've given advice on speaking, and we've talked about the value of it. Jason, if you could give one piece of advice to a business person, to a founder, from your wealth of history, even including your grunge rock, what would that one piece of advice be, do you think?
Yeah, great question. So one piece of advice I would want to give to business owners, I'm definitely leaning into my West Coast side here now, where I'm thinking of this advice. And it's a little bit about what we've talked about here. But my advice to business owners would be to focus, to follow your heart, to follow your passion, to focus on the heart side, as opposed to focusing on the money and then figuring out, how do I get to that money? Focus on the value that you're bringing the world, that your business is bringing the world, knowing that the money will follow the value. That would be my biggest piece of advice. It's a little bit of a sort of a similar also advice of what is referred to as Zen, or Zen advice, which is the law of attachment. So the second that we let go of attachment to something is the moment that we receive it. And I've experienced this countless times in my career where I deeply, desperately wanted something, whatever that thing was, a gig or a job or this or that. And you can obsess on it so much that you lose sight of the value that you're trying to bring the world. And you can get overly, I think, absorbed with your own needs. I want money. I want money for me and my family. And those are important needs. That's what business is for, is to make money, but it's also there to help our country and transform the world. And so I think that would be my advice, is as much as you can stay focused on the value itself that you bring people, regardless of how much money it's going to make. The more you can do that, it's kind of counterintuitive, the more money will actually follow that value.
Yeah, I can definitely get behind focusing on the value, because, gosh, you've seen it so many times where a brand gets really big, they reduce their quality in an effort to increase their profit, and they lose it all. So I think
Right.
that's a great topic. Thank you very much.
Yeah, absolutely. My pleasure.
So let's shift gears a little bit. You've got an exciting new venture that I think speaking is certainly going to help. Why don't
Yeah.
you talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. No, appreciate that. Yeah, as I was, starting out and then going through the beginnings of this public speaking career last year, I realized that one of the most important messages for me, and I'm a father. I call myself the constant father. I've been a father of boys for 26 years now and counting. And I have, a 10-year-old. So I think a lot about the issues that affect young people, basically. And obviously one of the biggest issues, and we're seeing it in every headline every day now, is about, digital addiction, basically. We're all struggling with that. So it became clear to me at a certain point that I wanted to focus at least a certain amount of my work on digital addiction prevention. And so I created a company of the same name and grabbed the domain of the same name, and really am focusing on that as sort of the biggest piece of value that I can bring to people, young and old, I'll say, because a lot of us love to go and point our fingers at Generation Z, get off your phone, get off your phone. Meanwhile, what are we doing? We're constantly on our phones. So I created the company Digital Addiction Prevention in order to be able to give people the tools and the mentorship or training that they need in order to take control of their own mental and physical health. And I think for me, that's one of the things I care about the most, is the fact that we really do have all of the knowledge and tools available to us to have very high level mental and physical health. But we are often taught that we need to rely on outside sources, et cetera, in order to do that. But we actually don't. And amazingly, the main tools that I give in my program as well, I would say 19 out of 20 of those tools are 100% completely free as well. They don't require any investment in order to have those, are free, as I say, free tools available for us. So that's really become a big focus of my work, is how do we first let go of our addictions to our screens? Because what I find is that when we're addicted to our screens, it's almost impossible now to absorb any of the tools and trainings I want to give. So that's the first step in my program, is how do we let go of those addictions? And then once we do, what are now the other sources of energy, other sources of even entertainment that are out there for us in the natural world that we can start to bring into our lives to bolster our mental and physical health?
Interestingly, I'm a big reader, and part of my
Right.
evening ritual is to shut everything down and read for an hour before I go to bed.
Love it.
Just for that reason, I find I sleep much better. But at
Yeah.
risk of going off topic yet again, I think that's super exciting. Have you yet discovered the stages that you can use to help spread that message, or is that still a work in progress, Jason?
In terms of the public speaking stages,
Yes.
I've been over the last few months now. Yeah, I have been discovering them, and it's interesting. There are not many stages that are devoted solely to this. So a stage devoted solely to digital addiction prevention. However, what I'm finding is that, so the stages that I'm applying to these pay talks, they're almost all associations, right? This is kind
Yes.
of the
Same.
association space. They have their yearly conferences. There's literally thousands across North America, as you know. So those are the stages that I'm sort of looking at. And what's interesting to me, I've found, is there's a lot of different industries in which this talk is relevant. Because really, this talk is relevant for, in all honesty, for anyone and everyone, not just in the workplace, not just in schools. It's something we all need. But to hone it down a bit more, yes, I've been finding there are a number of industries where this feels like a really good match. Whether that's in the IT space itself, entrepreneur space. There's a sentence for me, sort of all the tech is meaningless if we're miserable. And I like to speak to entrepreneurs and kind of YPO, the Young Presidents Organization, people like that, because successful CEOs, even in addition to young people, because I picture always, the successful entrepreneur, he's just made his next $1 million and sold this and sold that. He's on the beach with his family. It's the time for rewards. It's the time I did it. I made it. Here I am with my family. I just paid for this great vacation. And what am I doing? I'm still just on Instagram. Yeah. So that's that image that keeps coming back to me, even for successful entrepreneurs, is they need this message as badly as a 13-year-old who is, struggling with their mental health as well.
No, that makes a ton of sense. And I think that to your point earlier about value, brings an enormous amount of value to the world. But listen, Jason, I think this is a good place to tie things down. We've covered a lot of material. Let me ask, where can people find you if they want to learn more about you, about speaking, and about your digital addiction prevention?
Absolutely. I appreciate that. So I would say the two best places, one that's easy because everyone is there and it's easy to find me, is LinkedIn. You can just find me there. My DMs are open, so no problem at all. Jason Quarter on LinkedIn. I also, however, have my company that I started last year, as I say, Digital Addiction Prevention. And people can also reach out to me by email, jason@digitaladdictionprevention.com.
Awesome. And as always, folks, please don't get into a car crash trying to write those things down. They'll be in the show notes, whether it's on Apple, Spotify, wherever, or of course on YouTube where the video podcast lives. Jason, thank you very much for coming on. I truly appreciate it. I look forward to continuing to talk and explore where we can support each other. But I think this was a great episode.
I as well, and I'm very, very honored to be on it, and especially the fact that you were willing to take me on as a San Francisco shoegazer. It just shows your level of tolerance is high.
I'm a very magnanimous person. Thanks again, Jason. Listen, folks, as always, between this week and our next show next week, continue being awesome and making great things.